Okay, we'll make a start. Good evening, everybody. We do still have people joining us, so bear with me if I'm a little distracted just while I admit people from the waiting room. I'm Nikki, I am Head of Research at Pasture for Life, and welcome to the third in our winter webinar series. We've had some brilliant webinars so far, which are available on YouTube if you want to go back and watch them. And I'm just overjoyed to be joined by three of my, well, I was thinking, are they in my top 10 farmers? Maybe even the top 5. And we'll have a debate maybe who else joins them in the Hall of Fame of farming. But yeah, really chuffed that we're joined this evening by Denise Walton from Peel and Farm, George Young from Fobbing Farm, and Rich Thomas from Risbury Court Farm, all three of whom have been a massive source of inspiration to me, and advice and guidance as well, and just delighted that they're able to come and share their lessons learned from various agroforestry projects with us this evening. So I think what we'll do is we'll get started, and I'll let each of them introduce themselves and their farms a little bit. So we're going to have 15-minute presentations from each of them, and then we will have time for some questions at the end. It's only an hour this evening, so you'll be able to go off and get your dinner or whatever you need to afterwards. So because of that, we're going to make a start pretty immediately, I think. So George, I'm going to hand over to you, and hopefully you should be able to share your screen. I'm going to just make you a co-host so that you can.
Lovely. I think this is working.
Brilliant.
Can everyone see that?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, perfect. It looks like, apparently I'm sharing my screen. People scream and shout if I'm not. Cool. Right. Well, thank you very much, Nikki. I'm just going to apologise. I quite often do these things by the seat of my pants, but the seat of my pants has never caught up to me quite as much as it has in this one. I was also beset by some IT issues. So anyway, I know roughly what's on my slideshow, but it's probably to some extent as much a surprise to you as it is for me when I get to the next slide. So we'll see what it looks like. Anyway, so very quickly, I thought I'd kind of whistle through a little bit about kind of who I am, and kind of this leads into kind of why I did agroforestry, and then the certain type of agroforestry that I am kind of doing here. So a lot of the things that I am known for, or I think I'm known for anyway, is I obviously grow heritage wheat varieties, heritage cereals, things like that, which look rather pretty. These are crops that I can grow without any inputs. I'm actually in organic conversion on my farm now. I say I'm in organic conversion. I need to do the organic paperwork, but in theory, I'm in organic conversion. And these are crops that work very well with the system of farming that I'm approaching here on the farm. We utilize an awful lot of herbal layers. So essentially an awful lot of my mission is to incorporate as much diversity into every part of every field on my farm. Herbal layers are an amazing way to do that. They're obviously an amazing way, as I'm sure you guys know, of kind of resetting your fertility, really kind of restructuring your soil, providing great health benefits for anything that's on it, and kind of really bringing ecology back onto the farm. I know this is a very common butterfly. I have an issue of only being able to take pictures of common things on my farm, but ecology is a really key driver for an awful lot of what I'm doing on the farm. And cows are have become more and more of a part. I was actually reading a document I wrote 3 years ago before I got my herd. So these came on the farm 2 years ago, saying that I didn't think I'd ever have cows or want to kind of really get into all the nitty gritty of cows. And here I am 2 years later, now with 85 cows and lots of dung beetles. And I'm pretty obsessed with growing a herd, and have actually moved somewhat away from, or not away, but I'm diversifying away from red poles to incorporate beef shorthorn as well. So yeah, and calving twice a year and making all my life a lot more complicated than it was before I had cows. Anyway, I think my life is also a lot richer for them because look how pretty they are. But yeah, essentially kind of what it really boils down to, and why agroforestry is such an amazing component of a farming system that I'm trying to build, is because for me, it's all about connectivity and wild. So this is a little picture of my cows when they first got to graze something which I'm calling a wild seam. This is a seam that runs through the middle of my entire farm, and it's all about trying to ensure that the entire farm is connected to each other. So this seam runs through the middle and connects every single field together. And the aim is then to have wild margins on every single field that connect to this wild seam. And then ultimately the aim is that every single field will then have a silver pasture or agroforestry system to ensure that kind of there is connectivity for nature across every single part of my farm. And this is all about being able to kind of get all the welfare benefits and the nutritional benefits for livestock, really building that ecology and putting animals in places where they otherwise wouldn't necessarily be, which is obviously ecologically exceptionally beneficial. Oh yes, and then one more thing about me is that I also do some flower milling. I would say if it looks like I have lots and lots of ideas, that's definitely true. And I would also say that managing all these ideas is exceptionally difficult, especially considering I'm now doing this 100% solo without any employees. So I'm actually considerably simplifying a lot of my operations as it stands at the moment, making life a little bit easier for me because no, it's not possible to do all of these things as one person. So yeah, agroforestry is obviously an important part of or an important idea or system that I can integrate to get all these benefits across the entire farm, as well as obviously delivering food. I actually established my agroforestry system 2 years ago now, almost exactly 2 years ago, with a little bit of supplemental planting last year as well. And it's fair to say that I have learned an awful lot in the process and would make a lot of decisions if I were to do it again. And I will be doing it again. And I'm sure I will have many more realizations when I do my next kind of big batch of planting. So this is my full list of what I planted on the farm. I have done a 50-acre bit of agroforestry planting. We are on 36-meter alleys and 6-meter belts for the trees. And on the whole, the trees are planted in double row belts. So we've got 2 rows of trees on each belt. I mean, if you want to log onto my blog from, I think like August or September 2020, that's where you can find this plan. It's also on my Instagram at Farming George, back from that sort of time. Yeah, sort of late summer or early autumn 2020 was when I put this plan up. It took me a long time to figure out a way of actually planning this in terms of tree spacing and all of that, which made a lot of sense, but I quite like this system in the end. And essentially this was a system really kind of designed around diversity, based, or not really based on, but taking a lot of inspiration from the Wakelands model, of trying to ensure that kind of you had lots of different species next to each other. If you obviously look at someone like Stephen Briggs's model, where he will have every belt of trees will be planted with the same type of tree or the same variety, and then the next belt will be different, obviously in a way of trying to assuage any issues with disease. I've tried to kind of do that and also meld it slightly with the Wakeland system in terms of massively increased diversity. I'm not really quite onto talking about my mistakes yet, but that's a big mistake, and I wouldn't actually recommend anyone do this level of diversity, because my biggest realization has been that I don't think there are the people out there to help me manage this system of agroforestry that I have created. And ultimately, I'm not massively bothered because I don't mind if my cows graze amongst them and eat the fruit. It's not an overall mistake, but I think in terms of actually necessarily getting the most out of the agroforestry system, I think I can make it simpler and more mechanized in the future. But like I say, very diverse. It's a really fun system of planting. And it's really exciting when various things are actually on fruit to be able to go up and try the different things that are growing and really see what's working and what's not working. As a little bit of an example in here, you can see quite quickly, apricots, peaches, nectarines, almonds are all obviously not exactly species that you'd necessarily expect to be find growing in the UK. I'm in South Essex, and quite a specific microclimate within South Essex. We're actually more akin, if you were to say a European climate, it's more of a sort of a Brittany climate in France. So a bit more warmth, a bit more frost protection. That didn't come in today though. and so that does enable me to try some slightly more interesting things and try stuff that would be slightly more expectant of a warmer climate. But obviously some of this planting is based on expecting climate change to happen. And obviously if they're not going to mature for 5 to 10 years, I think they'll be doing quite well in the future. On this, what I've learned so far is apricots seem to be doing really well. Almonds I don't know about yet. Nectarines and peaches certainly are seeming to struggle. But we'll see what that looks like going forward. So just some kind of rough pictures to talk through. This is what the field looked like before. You can, depending on how high resolution your screens are, there are a few stakes in, which was me beginning to mark out where my agroforestry belts were going. And it's really weird seeing the field or knowing the field as it is now, seeing it as it looked before, obviously just with it being a plain arable field. As it happens, it was actually then established with grass, and I'll come slightly more onto that in a minute. In terms of establishment, I opted to establish most of my trees. Now, these are the bare root and the pot trees. Now, just in terms of something, if people haven't done planting and are similarly as ignorant as I was when I planted the trees, they do come as either kind of the whips, which is what you expect if you're planting sort of any of the native sort of broadleaves or anything like that. So, you know, oaks and aspens and whatever, and all the way you get your hedges. Those are obviously very easy to spade in, and spading them in is a good way of establishing those. I get very good take with those and have done for a number of years. But a lot of these fruit trees either come in a pot or come as bare root. And obviously you don't necessarily, if you're planting a lot, like I say, I did 50 acres in one hit. I would not recommend that either, because it was something like 6,000 trees in one hit. But planting them all with a spade, unless you've got 100 volunteers, is going to be very difficult. So I opted to use an auger. There are good and bad points about this. Obviously, it's quick. So this is an auger on a digger, quite easy to go up. I spent a long time laying out, marking holes with marker paint on the floor. But the problems with using an auger is it creates a round hole, and you will end up having issues where your roots go round and round in circles unless you smash up the sides. Let's turn my phone on silent. Unless you smash up the sides of the hole. So it did mean having to smash the sides of a hole with a spade before doing it. We're on a lot of clay, so that was something I was quite anal about. But I am concerned, given the fact that I had to use gang workers to plant my trees, just how well it was necessarily done on every single tree. If you plant in really good conditions, you will probably get away with it. And on certain soil types, you'll get away without having to do anything apart from just using the auger. And again, I can't remember which order the slides are in, but you'll see whether or not my conditions were clement or not at the time of planting. This is another thing which is probably quite specific to people's farms. I don't know if you can make it out where my finger is pointing. That is a marker post for the oil pipeline. I've got one running straight across my farm. Now, bearing in mind, I had spent 2 years planning my agroforestry planting. Oh, I mean, 5 years loosely planning it and researching it, 2 years actually planning the specific planting that I was doing. I had gone and sown all the understory for the belts, the 6 meter belts. That was all in before I established the herbal lay that was in this field. And I failed to notice until I actually marked out with string on my GPS system 2 days before planting the fact that one of my belts was slap bang on top of an oil pipeline in exactly the orientation of it. Luckily, I'm quite good friends with the guy who marks out my pipelines in my area, and he came out very quickly, and I had to do a little bit of wrangling. But little simple thing, if you've got any services running through your fields, it's useful to know what you're allowed to plant above them, and make sure you don't put a belt of trees straight above an oil pipeline, because they won't be very happy. This is also something which, you know, count it incredibly down to my naivety, but having before planting fruit trees and agroforestry like this, I'd only ever planted whips where you get, you know, a couple of hundred in a bin bag without even thinking about it. This was, I think, about 950 trees arriving on a curtain side of lorry. They were all massive, and it really gave me the willies. It was quite a scary thing. A lot of these were pot planted trees, and obviously the bare roots. So it was really quite something to see them arrive and think, wow, It's my job now to keep them alive and get them in the soil. So here's a nice picture of my parents and a less nice picture of me. This was us working out our system the day before or the evening before all of my kind of planting team arrived. So we knocked in, I think it was about 13 quinces. We planted, checking that the auger worked, checking the system of putting down these weed suppressant mats and things like that. And there are a few things to talk through here. Now, the first thing is, as I've put in my little comment there, about these very neat herbal lay rows growing underneath. I had, as I said, planted a chosen kind of understory for the tree belts, but it didn't take everywhere. And so I just decided to plant a herbal lay across the rest of the field where they hadn't taken. And I'd say this is one of my most big mistakes, is the fact that the grass just massively competes with the trees. So my view would be, whatever you do, don't stick grass in a belt where you've got your trees. Tip number one. So I would go for clovers and wildflowers all day and just take all the grass out of that. Also, I had massive issues with delivery. So they came at all different times, which massively kind of confused being able to plant, because I couldn't plant in a linear fashion. I couldn't work my way up the field. So I had to kind of plant belt 2, then belt 7, and then some more trees arrived and I could plant belt 1. It made a massive issue to being able to plant sensibly. Also, I had possibly the most diabolically wet year to plant. Now, you can't plan for that, but it's bad. I'm still dealing with, I'm hoping the next slide. Oh yeah, so here we go. There's some ruts that I'm still dealing with now across the field, and those ruts were generated by ATVs. So a simple ATV, and they're rock hard now. I'm hoping with cattle grazing in the future, they will disappear. And yeah, like I say, I didn't have enough time to plan this properly, or I would have had some better pictures. Big thing. So you obviously saw that I was using weed suppressant mats. Those were compostable mats. They do not work. Do not use those compostable mats. They're meant to last 3 to 4 years. They last 6 months at an absolute best. Wood chip is great. Put it on. It worked wonders for me this year. It didn't 100% sort the issue with the drought, but it did a really good job with that. So I definitely think wood chip is the best way to go. And if you can't get hold of stuff without the fir in it, without the conifer, you can buy it and store it for at least a year and turn it a bit, and the detrimental properties of those conifers will go away. I'd also massively recommend, if you're dealing with it with livestock, to permanent or semi-permanently fence the belts while they're getting to established enough size before you can run them with livestock. Because otherwise you're setting up an entire new paddock every day you move, and trust me, that's difficult. And also dealing with badgers. I have no solution for this, but they will dig up your trees. Whether you plant with a weed suppressant mat, whether you plant with wood chip, they will go after things will dig up your trees, and it's very annoying. I'm going to whistle through because I think I'm going slightly over time, but I just put some nice extra pictures in because there's lots of joy about the fiance getting home. There's lots of joy about planting these trees, and certainly my nephew's coming out and doing some guard work with amazing, and some planting, and you know, massively satisfying to walk up the field now, get it to graze it with the cows. It's absolutely brilliant. And yeah, look how pretty it looks. Anyway, I think, buds, there's more. I'll whistle through them. And being able to make jam from currants and things like that. So yeah, anyway, that is me. I hope that was somewhat useful.
George, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing the kind of warts and all issues that you encountered during that planting. And I'd forgotten actually just how wet it was for you. And I think for us, it was this year we had really, really horrendous snow. And yeah, it was tricky weather for everybody, I think, that year. So thank you for sharing. We're going to move on. We'll come to questions later on, but I'm conscious that we are running a little bit over. So we're going to go to Denise. So we're going to go from Essex, fly up England, hop over the border and land just into Scotland to hear what Denise has been up to. Different system, looking primarily at hedges. So Denise, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to just get into my slide showing mode, but it's share the screen share. And that's me. Share. How's that? Can everybody see that?
Yeah, we just need you to put it on slideshow. We can see.
Yes, it should be starting any minute.
There we
How's
go. Perfect.
Good. Okay, wonderful. I'm just going to shift that bar. I've got that annoying bar. Great. Well, thank you very much, Nikki, for asking me here. Hello, everybody. It's always a huge pleasure to do this for Pasture for Life. Very passionate follower. And as a family, we farm Pasture for Life. And so Peelham Farm, Southeast Berwickshire. And this is really looking at, sorry, getting a bit far. So it's really looking at hedgerows and their relation to agroforestry. So just very quickly to us, I apologize for the old Pasture for Life symbol. I have got a new logo, just didn't realize I had kept that on, but 650 acres, mixed organic pasture for life, family farm, multi-species farming, holistically managed and ecosystem enriching. And that's a very important part of our ethos and also an important part of marketing our meat we sell direct. So just straight into agroforestry. If agroforestry is farming with trees interspersed across a local farmed landscape, then hedgerows are farming with scrub closely grown in corridors forming enclosures. So there's a lot more bulk. We're talking about a lot of bulk here. Both systems, agroforestry with trees, as George was describing, and hedgerows, and we really focus on hedgerow thickets, so not trimmed hedgerows, but thickets that form browsing opportunities. So both systems provide shelter for livestock and maintain and increase live weight gain, and of course shelter for wildlife and humans. Both tackle climate change. They moderate microclimates and store carbon both above and below ground. There's been some amazing research done by the ORC, the Organic Research Centre, about the amount of carbon that a mature thicket can absorb. A mature thicket can absorb from something like 131 tonnes of carbon per hectare per year. So we're talking about carbon sequestration both above and below ground with a great intermesh of root and mycorrhiza. They both regulate hydrology, interrupt the fall of precipitation above ground, breaking heavy rainfall. We get sporadic rain bombs, and which really penetrate the ground. And even we've got cover, you can get leaching. So precipitation is broken above ground and it slows the movement of water below ground. And this is very important too. You get a slow dispersion, you get the replenishing of water tables, and the carbon sponge is refreshed as well. They both increase habitat infrastructure and add to landscape character. And landscape character is an important factor as well in giving texture to often just monoculturalized landscapes. And it gives, it's important for farmed animal, wildlife and human welfare. So shelter for farmed animals, shelter for wildlife and shelter for humans as well. And adding to the greenery that is so important for our sense of well-being. So both systems provide this. So just a little bit of history, but I do know that in a recent 2021 study, I think the author was name of Decker, was writing about carbon sequestration, actually described hedgerows as a form of agroforestry. So I think our hedgerows are in good company, George, and with the whole move to agroforestry. So just very, very quick history, because I think this is important in terms of the development of how we've approached hedgerows. So hedgerows were initially what was called bocage. I'm sure you're familiar with this. There's a regular scrub and tree corridor feature from the clearance of ancient woodland. It's typical in the west of France, southwest England, Southern Ireland, pre-enclosure. So you can see the image on the right-hand side, that's typical sort of Western French Limousin bocage system, where you have very shaggy scrub and trees, wonderful habitat. So by comparison, okay, this is bocage has been a long-term landscape and habitat feature in Western France and Southern England, and of course Southern Ireland. But in Berwickshire, in the middle of the 18th century, it was an open run rig landscape. And this actually is a copy of Roy's military map of 1750. And this Pelham, where we found, is literally south of the southern bottom right-hand square. It's very close to this image. Roy's military map was known for its accuracy because obviously he was instructed to anglicize Scotland from the border upwards to the Highlands. And it's very important for the military road that he was building to have accurate descriptors. So you can see the run rig is actually here illustrated on this map. Berwickshire in southern Scotland had a very late enclosure, and hedgerows aren't a semi-natural feature of the Berwickshire and southern Scotland landscape. So in a way, that's sort of what we've inherited. So Pelham in 1993 had, other than what you can see in the green, had minimal hedgerows. It had no field boundaries. The boundaries that show were dilapidated fences, which had been hedgerows. So there were hedgerows, but they're very relatively modern hedgerows. It was a dysfunctional agri-ecosystem, very sparse, very windswept. Because there were no boundaries, it limited our farming opportunities. We had to continue an arable system when we moved into Pelham. So we very quickly started creating hedgerows to, and I have to say this, it was an important part of, we wanted to create hedgerows as well. There were grants for hedgerows, but also there were grants for fences. So we were able to restructure fences, restructure the field system infrastructure, and plant thicket hedgerows. And here on the left image is a Mypex mulch mat and a wide thicket hedgerow. And you can see it in the middle image there with my lovely old collie, sort of mid-growth. And here on the very right-hand side, I took that this evening. We've got this wonderful thicket growing towards the edge of the field. So it's creating thicket boundaries between existing habitats. So here's another thicket that we gapped up. So in terms of habitat structure, landscape texture, really important to break wind speed. And you will see all these beautiful trees actually in the middle horizon. They are no longer there. A year ago, they were blown down. So we've got an even more sparse landscape. So the hedgerows that we're planting are really important. So looking at corridors of structural edges, linking habitats and forming focal nodes of diverse structure and species activity. We know ecologically that where different habitats meet, you get greatest ecological activity. And where habitat meets, where hedgerow meets other habitats and where it meets hedgerow, you get these nodes of activity. So that was an important factor in the way we designed our hedgerows and the hedgerow matrix across the farm. Pelham 2021, 6 kilometres of hedgerow later, but also it's not just about hedgerows, it's about linking existing habitats and restoring existing habitats. So this is a whole farm habitat restoration, a whole farm system. So everything kind of interconnects and supplements and complements the habitat richness. So woodland, since 1995, we've increased by 50%, hedgerows by 75%, that was easy, so 6 kilometres. Also standing water is important, and increasing these nodal connections of ecological activity, multifold, and increasing the edge density. Edge density is an important factor of sort of all habitats. So hedge density was also increased to really kickstart as much as we could the ecosystem function of our farm. So we were lucky and against the odds and unexpectedly post-Storm Arwen, which kind of got really deprived of us of a mature beech plantation, I put an application for the Scottish Government Nature Restoration Fund administered by Nature Scot, and we were unexpectedly, our project was accepted to plant 11 kilometres of hedgerow. And this is actually splitting all the fields up from typical 20-acre fields into 10-acre fields to accommodate rotational mob grazing with our 150 head of Aberdeen Angus cattle. So you can see the crosshatch boundaries are all the new boundaries on the farm. And we're also doing existing boundaries actually onto our neighbours' farms to extend the benefit of the hedgerow sort of connectivity. So the design of the hedgerows really was the focus, in addition to habitat, was also to accommodate our livestock grazing. So here we've got livestock grazing, pasture for life grazing, absolutely hand in glove with habitat creation. So what we did, and I was really interested to hear, George, what you were saying about your planting, is part of the contract was to use a hedge planting machine. Raymond Stronach, who's from Aberdeen with the thickest Doric accent you would ever want to hear, is a forestry contractor who modified a machine to plant hedgerows. We inspected his hedgerows in Aberdeen, absolutely fantastic, and literally 50 centimetres apart. Two people sit beneath the red canopy, slotting the plants, and they're all modular plants with peat plugs, but actually they're not peat. We selected a nursery on the basis that they didn't use peat. So non-peat plugs to plant densely, and also at the same time roll a mulch, which is a polylactic acid, 95%, and 5% hemp. So not compostable, but certainly biodegradable, and pinned very tightly against the plants. We have volunteers following up the planting to actually pin the plants down with pegs. So here we are, the photograph on the left I took this evening, and this is one of the thicket hedgerows, potentially to split an existing open field. And then on the right hand, a very quick sketch, I did it about sort of half an hour ago, which shows the cross section of basically of the plan. So 50 centimetre separated hedgerow scrub plant, and also trees, a 3 metre wide thicket. And then basically this will allow for edge browsing by cattle. So you will actually, the edge of the plants will grow over the edge of the fencing. So we'll get cattle by edge browsing, will help us trim the hedgerows. And I'll just go back, the species mix, we've got 9 species: hawthorn, blackthorn, hazel, grey willow because of its high tannin content and salicylic acid, crabapple, bird cherry, gean, dog rose, holly, all lots of berrying, rich fruiting plants. So this all looks a bit like a guddle, but basically, you know, when you introduce ecosystem function, it is a guddle. You know, we want texture, we want the sort of the controlled chaos, the lateral functioning of ecosystems and all their wonder. So from a sort of landscape ecological point of view, the kind of the patch and matrix and energy flow of sort of landscape ecological theory, we can actually trace, not trace, no, that's the wrong use of the word, but you can see energy species in terms of food and flow in relation to different landscape groups and types that we've developed on the farm, and how the function of the movement of animals and species in relation to the hedgerows. So we've got greater landscape texture, we've got habitat roughness, we've got refuge, niches for farmed and wildlife, and us humans as well, hiding places, quiet places full of food, full of shelter, full of life. We've got plenty of key habitat indicator species to demonstrate that over the last sort of 25 years, we have introduced the function back to our farm. So we've got a very good selection of mixed farmland species linked to the hedgerows, wetland species, and also other farmed agri-ecosystem species. So the fact that we've got these species breeding on the farm, especially the bird species, demonstrates that we've been successful in introducing, recreating the ecosystem function to our farm. Lots of food, lots of pollination, lots of fruiting, and importantly, habitat connectivity and human meaning. Grandsons spend a lot of time foraging and grubbing amongst hedgerows for blackberries. So linking in with George's final slide, the well-being factor is really important. The satisfaction is really important. So from a very windswept, very sparse farm with dilapidated infrastructure, we've grown with the help of hedgerows and hedgerow thickets, sort of a much greater human value and meaning, as well as ecosystem function back to our farm. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Sorry, that was a huge, a bit of a gallop through that.
No, that was brilliant. Really, really fantastic. And I'm sure there'll be questions that we'll come to in a little while. I'm going to gallop on from you, and we're heading back down country to Herefordshire to listen to Rich. And just because we are running a bit over, we're just going to crack on with you, Rich, if that's all right. And hopefully you'll be able to share your screen.
Yeah, that's fine. Can you hear me? Is that okay? Can you hear me?
It's perfect. Yeah.
Cool. Right, let me just where's the run the slideshow button? That would be on slideshow. There we go. From beginning. Oh, hang on a minute. Okay. Share screen. That one. Share. Right. Please play. Is that working?
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'll try and be quick. I'll set my time. What time is it now? Oh no, that clock doesn't work. Sorry. Okay, I'll try and be 10 minutes. I'll try and cut it, like not cut it, but sort of whistle through. This is an amended presentation I've done before with some other bits chucked in. I was going to take a load of stuff out, but then I thought the one thing I say is what, and listen to George, who is one of my farming heroes, and Denise talking before. Agroforestry kind of like, I've had this thing like, can you be a bit regenerative? Yes, you can probably, but actually once you kind of open the box and you understand about the whole thing, you know that everything has its place. And yes, okay, you can have a field of trees or whatever, but actually it's the whole thing. So I thought I'd leave the other bits in because it kind of, in my head, it works anyway. So run with me, right? I shan't read it out too much because I'm sure you can all order that for yourselves, but we're a relatively small farm here in North Herefordshire. Cut the ewes back a bit this year because it was so dry. A little bit of arable because my father does like feeding a little bit of corn to cattle. That I know it's perhaps not the most appropriate thing to talk about, but that's part of what we do. So that's fine. And we're in stewardship, and I think we're a dry farm. I don't know. I'm not having a competition with George, but it's been a dry few years. So we're sort of you can see where we are, sort of sub 25 inches, 24 inches, something like that. So there you go. That's how where we are. This is the whole farm. Actually, I'm going to whistle through this, but in order to try and make more of the sun and have our ecology, we need trees and hedges and everything to work as part of that system. So that's what we're doing. And when I started on my kind of journey, to use the phrase, you kind of realize that actually the most difficult changes are the ones you make, the square foot between your ears. So and if you don't try something, you're never going to get anywhere, are you? So this is the farm mapped on AgriWeb. You can do it on Google. just gives you an idea. The average field size is probably around 6-7 acres, something like that. But the maybe a bit bigger. But the squares that you see, the different colours, they're all hectare blocks. And I'll come back to the hectare block and the splitting up bit later on. But that's my sort of imaginary map where basically my fences go to split the farm up. And I've left these in because in all these photos, yes, we've got great recovery on the fields. There's 2 photos at the bottom, that sort of stuff. And we've got hedges and we've got trees. But when I'm thinking about being outside in the winter and being outside in a hot summer like we have been this year, I kind of, now I know what I know, I want more trees. So we're just trying to plant more trees. Grass goes grass, that's fine. Cattle on herbal lays. All right, they're laying down here in the bottom. And the photo on the left there. You know, we got these big tall hedge lines. We like that. The one down below, which is the one you can see on the right hand photo, is a laid hedge. So hopefully we're trying to get this diversity of ecosystems as well, with tall hedges and laid hedges, and then the cycle carries on. Again, woodland behind to the right of this photo, but you can't see it, is another hedge. It's a bit thin, been laid a long time ago, but more trees. So, okay, run with me, more trees. Bale grazing, again, imagine if I had a line of trees down the middle of this field, and this is where I'm going to get to in a later photo. Okay, I've been 5 minutes, 3 minutes. If I had a line of trees down the middle of this field, that'd be the top left photo, then I'd have a lot more shade and shelter for the cattle. So 2 books, I didn't take this out because 2 books, probably essential reading, or 3 actually. The one at the bottom of the list is the Soil Association Handbook. It's available online. Steve Gabriel's book, Silver Pasture, is very good. Looking at podcasts he's done and videos he's done, he's very good. And then this other book here, which I managed to find, by J. Russell Smith, Tree Crops. It's not really a reading book, but it's a really good reference book. And it is North America, but it's a good read if you're interested in that sort of thing. So, okay, I'll whistle through this one, but all this kind of stuff, you know, the pressures we're getting, more trees, more trees, more trees. If you want to see those, I'll show you later. Our regenerative our regenerative system, we're trying to make, I want to have a low input, we've got a pretty low input cattle herd, but I want to have a lower input sheep flock. And 2 of the issues we've got is, one is cobalt and one is gastrointestinal worms, and longer grass, longer rest periods, that sort of thing. But as a part of that, one of the highest stores of cobalt that you can get in our sort of general ecosystems that we all live in would be willow trees and poplar trees, and they're on all of our farms. So it was funny, I was cutting a couple of branches out of a willow tree this summer when it was so dry, so that the cattle had something extra to eat, just to try and, you know, extend that rotation. And the old boy in the next door field said, "You want to cut that off at the ground, boy, and get rid of it?" But and I was like, "No, I don't, because it's a willow tree and it's got all these other benefits." So you know, it's that sort of thing. We want more trees to get to the place we want to get to for the regenerative system with lower inputs. So cows in trees, Nikki's favorite thing. These photos are all actually on the Shed Regenerative Monument, the Iron Age hill fort that's sort of in the middle of the farm. And they're all in, I think they were last year, actually. I had a problem getting photos off my phone, so I couldn't get the exact ones I wanted. You can see it's a hot day in June, very near Midsummer's Day, but they've got shade, they've got shelter. There's pear trees, there's apple trees in the distance. I think there's a spruce or something, and then you've got kind of hedgerowy trees around the outside, and I'm moving them through there. And the photo in the middle, again, it's a slightly different picture of a different part of the orchard, but they're browsing the lower trees of the apple trees. And then obviously we've got, and I've written it down here, those are all the things I can think of. There's probably more shade, shelter, biodiversity, habitat for other creatures and all that sort of thing. In fact, we've got the noble chaferwood beetle. Natural England came and did a study, and that's quite an important rare beetle, so I'm told, so that's good. Woodpeckers and all those other things going on. So the tree forage, yeah, right, they're not going to eat a lot of the apple trees, but they will eat the apples. Some of them that fall early before we pick them, and they will sorry, I'll speed up. I can't go much faster. And they'll eat the leaves and that sort of thing. And if you ever see a cow going for willow tree or a poplar tree or an apple tree, they absolutely love it. Different times of year, different leaves. And obviously we've got fruit and nuts, and if people want to eat meat, or they don't want to eat meat, or they'd like to eat meat and fruit and nuts, there's markets there. So that's really good. And then just this photo on the right hand side here, part of this area where the orchard is woodland, and I'm trying to get that back from being fairly bare, as you can see in that photo, to a grazed woodland. So and the cattle are helping us do that, along with a little bit of selective cutting out. Sheep, very much the same sort of thing. I'm not entirely certain this is a fair photo, the one on the right hand side, but I took it this morning, and although there's not much grass to be frosted in the foreground, it just to the other side of the photo, where there's a few less trees as you get to the edge of the field, there was more frost. So we went out to Scotland in October, and talking to a few people out there, an animal can use 20-30% of its energy to keep itself warm in winter. And so obviously it's going to be more forage to be able to do that. So if we can keep them warmer, and I know this is just an apple orchard, but all the other photos we've seen before with hedgerows and all the alleyways that George is putting in and that kind of thing, if we can keep the animals warmer because their environment is warmer, then they're going to use less energy, and then they're probably going to need to eat less forage, or maybe we can run more animals on the same ground or work within that. And we've got a more effective farming system, which is really good, I think. So hedges, I couldn't find the photo I wanted to of a laid hedge on my phone earlier on, but just a very short bit of hedge that we laid down. And because we've been doing this across the farm over the last few years, we've seen a big increase in the birds like the yellowhammer and other invertebrates and smaller mammals, that sort of thing, which is it's really cool. Like once you get into it and you start seeing, and obviously the new hedges we planted on the right hand photo there, that's been in 3 years now, planted, or 2 years, planted in lockdown anyway, and it's doing quite well. So hopefully I'll get the young farmers here to lay that in a few years' time as part of a competition. Woodland, I know we're talking about planting trees, not necessarily about taking them out, but in this woodland here on the left hand side, we've got quite a lash dieback, so we're taking out some of the not quite so nice trees, the ones that aren't quite so straight maybe, and on the right hand side here, just we've got a floor to replace in a barn. Wood's very expensive, so we've just found a few I think they're a spruce of some sort we've got on the farm, so we just felled a few and we're going to replant it with a broadleaf. So yeah, we just got to remember that there's a lot of uses of wood, and we can make that work for ourselves and all other things like furniture and that sort of thing. So this is my agroforestry project, only quite small compared to what George is doing, but as you'll see, I actually listened to George Young and George Sly talking to Will Evans on the Rock and Roll Farming podcast, and talking about what they'd done. And Stephen Briggs, I can't remember if he was on that or something else, or maybe I watched a webinar, and I just thought that's a really good idea. I should try a bit of that. And got conversations with Nikki and John Pawsey, actually a message from down in the southeast there. I said, what do you think, John? And he basically said that the thing that people will know, I'm sure, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is today. So just get on and do it. If you don't like it, time you could take it out, but you probably, as long as you think about it and plan it properly, it'll probably be fine. So after seeing what Stephen was doing, what George, the two Georges were doing, and conversations with the Woodland Trust, who funded the trees and the guards, these are on a 15-meter centre. So the idea being there would be 2 to 3 meters of alleyway where the tree actually is, and you can't see it in the photo, but there's a wire fencing alongside the trees. Well, some of them, and I haven't finished it all, to keep the stock from the trees, and then the gap between these 12 meters. So I'll come back to that later, but like, you can manage a 12-meter strip if you want to get back into arable. It'll fit a sprayer. I'm not saying we're going to do that, or even if you wanted to put biologicals on, it's a commonly used width. So I was trying to build in efficiency, and you probably can't hardly see it on your photos, but the bottom trees are guarded with green guards, and they're on a 2-meter planting width, and they are poplar and willow in varying across the top. I think there's willow and then black poplar, and then the more common poplar, which I think is kind of basically aspen, and then back to willow all the way down the field. And then the darker guards up on the bank, some of which have been knocked over by my sheep, which I was very cross about, are apple, hazel, and chestnut. So apples obviously for eating, hazel for coppicing, for hedging stakes and heatherings and biomass, and the chestnut and obviously the hazelnuts and the chestnuts for the chestnuts. And maybe in sort of 20-30 years time we'll be able to coppice them and use them for stakes, which is probably better than using creosote posts, because I don't really like those either. So that was my agroforestry project, and it's only 12-acre field, and I'm not sure I'd want to do it everywhere. As a first sort of foray into it, it's worked really well, I think, and we'll, you know, we lost quite a few trees, but we're going to replant the ones that we lost, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it develops. So it's just towards the end now. I'm sorry I've probably gone over time, but I just wanted to talk about system design, and it's something I've sort of started thinking about recently. We don't want to build inefficiency into our system. So from on the right-hand photo, the largest one, from that fence, the far side, to the post in the foreground is 80 meters. And so the photo on the top, you can see the site, you can see it lined up the field. This is where we've had polywire for the last couple of years. And again, you can see that in the bottom photo. 80 is not a multiple of 3 and 4. 72 is a multiple of 3 and 4 that fits that gap. So the point of being, if I'm putting polywire up and down, I'm wasting time. So one of the chatters talking to Ali Fleming from North Wales, it was, I think, one of the people who sort of made the point, like if you put that fence line up and down, yeah, you should be semi-permanent. But then, as Ali said, wouldn't it be really cool to have a line of trees next to that? Because you might as well. Why not? You've got a fence line, put a line of trees, put a hedge, whatever. So my plan is to put a semi-permanent line 72 meters with a 72 meter working width. I put that in capitals because you don't want to go 72, because then when you route to work, so you're going to want, anybody with machinery will tell you, you're going to want a meter or two either side. So we might go 75 maybe, put our semi-permanent fence in, and the mower can fit 3 meters. If we decide to do whatever, any sort of machinery is mostly being multiple of 3 and 4, and then we'll put a line of trees in, or it'll probably be poplar and willow, which I think would be quite good. And then we'll have a 3 meter cap, and then we'll carry on. Obviously, the other side of the field will be the same. So, yeah, connecting ecosystems, and as George and Denise has already talked about, which is really important. And when you start to see the animals and the birds and everything else working in it, it's actually really good fun. So I just wanted to make that point. And then there's my last two. Yeah. So sorry for going hopefully not too fast, and I'm not been quite as ordered as the other two speakers, but hopefully that's okay. Thank you.
Rich, that was brilliant, and it's really lovely to see actually those photos of the planting that you've put in quite recently. Having seen it as a plan on a bit of paper, it's really lovely to see it kind of finished. Well, not finished because you've got a bit more work to do on it, but kind of well on the way. Right. Do you want to stop sharing? And I'm just going to bring. No, don't worry. I'm just going to add Denise and George back in to spotlight so they can be seen. There were some questions that have come through the chat, and thanks ever so much for those of you who've been answering them as you go. Denise, I was disappointed no one asked what a guddle is, given that it's a Scottish word and we have not many Scottish attendees this evening. But for those who don't know, it relates to a messy process related to catching fish by hand. So yeah, there you go. Not a word you hear very often. So I think all the questions that we had in the chat have been answered. So we've got 5 minutes left. And I think I just want to ask some questions of the three of you. You really helpfully shared some resources, and you have talked about things that went really, really wrong. But I'd really love to hear from you. What's the absolute best thing? And you have all touched on this a little bit, but the absolute best thing about implementing agroforestry, and the absolute worst thing. Maybe do the worst thing first and then the best thing. So I'm going to go to George. What's the absolute worst thing and the absolute best thing about your agroforestry systems?
I think the absolute worst thing was just the level of work that was required for it. I was actually talking to someone about this today. I think, so it was a 2-week planting period for my trees, and there was sort of 4 weeks of work that I did to get it put in. And I just never anticipated. I was working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week for that 4-week period to get the trees established. It was just nuts. Now, that's also because I did 50 acres. Don't do that. So it's my mistake as much as anything. But yeah, just I don't think I anticipated just how much work that was, and similarly how much work, like how many little things happen in that field that kind of still need doing. So yeah, but in terms of the best thing, if I'm feeling pissed off or annoyed about farming or anything like that, I just go and have a walk in that field. And to be honest, there's nothing, it's almost like nothing more uplifting than the fact that I have, this is me saying, I'm interested in farming and dedicated to farming for the genuine long term. You don't do something like this if you're just farming a piece of land for the next year or two. And it's how that dedication makes you feel, and the excitement of what that field is going to look like in 10 years time, 20 years time, 40 years time, like when I'm retired and just get to wander about and enjoy it. That for me, there's nothing on the farm that gives me that level of pride and excitement and anticipation as my agroforestry field does.
Amazing, George. Thank you so much. Denise, absolute worst thing, absolute best thing.
Well, actually, I agree with George. It is the work. You get it takes ages, and there are always things you kind of wish you had done better, but it is the work. It is the hard physical work, but my God, it really is worth it. I mean, we were actually very lucky to find our Doric dialect eccentric inventing forestry contractor, Raymond Stronach, who is just a planter. He just plants, and that's made a huge difference. But we will be manually planting, but also engaging with volunteers and getting the locals to come and have. So basically, we're giving locals their own hedge, and they come and do the pegging and the sheltering and all this sort of thing. So, but it is the work. But the very best thing, right? It's actually suddenly, I suppose, with the level of connectivity to you, I'm sure there's a better word than that. You really feel that you are part and parcel of the ecosystem of your farm. So it's not just, the farmer and the livestock and doing bits and pieces around the edges. It's actually, we are part and parcel of the function of the ecosystem. And that's this wonderful sense of satisfaction and pride that George referred to. So it's really, and the more we do, the more it reveals itself and the richer it becomes. And, there's so much of farming is deprived of this really essential connection with, and also the livestock love it, the cattle love it. So, yeah, it's
Thanks,
that
Denise.
ethereal thing.
Brilliant. We have a 1 minute, Rich. Worst thing and the best thing. Sorry, you're busy.
Unmute. Sorry, I was just one. 1 minute. Goodness me. The worst thing, the planting it's a bit of a nuisance. It is a bit of a nuisance, but in these modern technological times, seeing what you've done, like the old thing about ploughing a field when you're looking, or laying a hedge, or cutting wood, it's that thing of I'm doing this, I can see what I've done. It's it is a satisfying thing, even if it is a massive amount of work. Trees dying, that's gutting, isn't it, when you just planted these trees and you come back and they're dead. So I'm going to replant, as I said on that slide, with whips, some of them, and that'll help, I think, in some ways. The best thing, I didn't say, but on that agroforestry thing we planted, that field's in a bit of a bowl, and my neighbours next door to here are a bit lower. The house has been flooded, I think, twice since it was built, and it's in the Doomsday Book, and those twice are within the last 10 years, something like that. Well, if we can slow down the water that comes from our neighbours across our place onto theirs, because we could, with the trees, we've got longer grass, I think that's really cool. We'll never find out if it works or not, but it's something good to think about. But yeah, it's the ecosystem, it's the biodiversity. We were fencing alongside a new hedge, and you could almost hear the voles. And my dog had to try and I don't know, tie him up or whatever, but they're digging for voles. They can hear. And it's like, and the yellowhammers living in the hedges, and then suddenly you can see those, and then somebody comes and tells you in the village, I saw this bird, and you think, it's really cool. So it's that, do you know what I mean? That sort of happiness that you gain from that. And probably the best one actually is going with my son, who's nearly 4, and showing him the trees that Dad and I planted when I was in school, probably now, maybe not school, certainly sixth form college or university. And he can then, I can lift him up and he can pick himself an apple to eat, and showing him the trees that my mum showed me, that her father showed her, where the best Worcesters are on the farm. Most of the apples are cider apples, but we've got quite a lot of fruit ones as well. So yeah, that connection, and getting that connection back to the back to nature, back to, you know, all those buzzwords is wonderful, and trees are a big part of that.
Amazing. That's just a brilliant thing to finish on. I'm sure we could have gone on for another hour at least with lots of discussion about this, but I'm very conscious that you guys are giving your time this evening for us, and I'm so grateful that you're able to do that. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your experience of agroforestry. I just want to finish very quickly to say that I was at a conference on Tuesday and I was hearing about some brilliant research where willow not only is being able to provide those tannins for anthelmintic properties and also cobalt and selenium, but is also now being evidenced to significantly reduce methane emissions from cattle as well. So that's some research that's coming out of Chagasc in Ireland, and I will make sure that I'm including updates around that in the newsletter, Pasture for Life membership newsletter going forward. So we will finish there because we're 2 minutes running over. Rich, Denise, George, you're just brilliant people, brilliant farmers. Thank you so much for sharing your evening with us, and yeah, really look forward to seeing you all probably at ORFC in January. Take care, folks. Thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye bye.